Good morning, everybody. We're just waiting for a few more people to join, so just hang around for another minute, please. Right, okay, I think we've got most people are in now. So good morning to everybody, and thanks very much for coming to our engagement event. This is the third and final in a series of events we're running to share the draft London Plan guidance on circular economy statements, which is currently undergoing consultation. This is our agenda for the session, and as I talk you through it, I'll be introducing this morning's panel of speakers. But to introduce myself first, for those who don't know me, I'm Rob McNichol. I work in the London Plan team as one of the policy team leaders at the GLA. I'm going to be chairing the event and we'll give you a few housekeeping notices in just a moment. We'll then have three presentations. The first presentation will be given by David Cheshire from ACOM. Dave's a regional director at ACOM, and he's been working with the GLA to implement the circular economy statement guidance, and his team is reviewing circular economy statements on behalf of the GLA. For those who don't know, the GLA works really closely with ACOM to help us deliver a whole range of environmental policy objectives, including developing the guidance. Dave's going to be giving us an intro to circular economy principles and how they can be applied to the built environment. Next up, we'll have Rohan Ranawira. Rohan has been working as a senior strategic planner within the London Plan team at the GLA, and he's led on drafting and developing the guidance. Rohan will be taking us through the draft guidance and how we envisage the guidance informing development proposals as they come forward. Give us a wave, Rohan. And then we'll have Andrea Charlson from the London Waste and Recycling Board. Andrea is the project manager for the Horizon 2020 funded Circuit project, and that aims to support the creation of regenerative cities through implementing sustainable and circular construction practices. Andrea is going to be telling us about the Circuit project and how it's helping to drive forward circular economy practices in the built environment. Say hello, Andrea. We'll then have an opportunity for some questions, and hopefully our session should last about an hour and a half, depending on how many questions we get. So a few bits of housekeeping. Firstly, just to let you know that we're going to be recording today's session. If you want to ask some questions, and please do, then use the Q&A function. We'll pick your questions up from there and we'll answer them. Please do start putting in questions as they come to you. We might pick up some questions between presentations, or we'll leave them until the end, but we will hopefully be able to come and answer all of the questions today. But don't wait until right at the end to write your question down. Write it down as it comes to you. If you do have any technical problems today, please use the chat function and message our colleagues Natalie Wells or Jill Lawton directly in the chat function. Just a very quick reminder about the London Plan. So the London Plan is the spatial development strategy for London. It sets out how London should develop over the next quarter of a century or so, and it includes specific policies dealing with new development. This includes policies that support the circular economy, and one way we do that is by requiring circular economy statements. This is the third version of the plan, depending on how you count them, and the 3 London mayors since 2000 have all produced a new plan. This new version is very nearly finished. We're intending to publish early next year. And to support the implementation of the plan, the GLA produces guidance, and we're now calling that London Plan Guidance, or LPG. As with the SPGs of old, the previously called supplementary planning guidance, this goes through consultation, and that's what we're doing now. We've also produced equalities impact assessments for the guidance, and that's available online as well as the guidance. And the guidance is then used when developers are designing schemes, when planning applications are being decided, and when local plans are being written. And the guidance is already being used and already being implemented. It has some material weight already. Just a little bit about the consultation itself. So the deadline is the 15th of January next year. There's a consultation survey, which is how we're asking for views on the draft guidance. So please follow that link and fill that in by the 15th. We can provide the survey in alternative formats to meet different accessibility requirements as well. You can also send us an email if you've got any queries. That's circulareconomylpg@london.gov.uk. And you can follow the GLA planning team at London_planning on Twitter. Anyway, I think that's enough from me for now. So I'm going to hand over to Dave Cheshire, if Dave's ready, to tell us about the circular economy. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I'll just put this up. Hi, yes. So I'll just give you a brief summary of how the circular economy principles and how they apply to the built environment. So, well, I mean, the idea that at the moment we're in this linear economy where we're digging a load of stuff out of the ground and using it for a while, and before we're throwing it away. And actually, this image is of mining bauxite in the Amazon rainforest, and bauxite is used to make aluminium for all our facades and our window frames and all the rest that we're using it for, and it's doing untold damage to pristine environments across the planet as we are busy mining for all these resources that we use in the built environment. And then at the other end of the scale, we have buildings that are being demolished within 30 or 40 years of being built, having demanded all those resources, with then basically crushing and shredding our buildings. And actually, all this material that comes out, all this waste material that comes here is actually not very useful. I mean, we can use it for things like road bases and for piling mats, but actually we can't turn it back into structural concrete. So it's really being downcycled rather than what I would call recycling, where you maintain the value of the resource in perpetuity. And the metals and the plastics there. So the metals will get recycled, but again, they're quite often contaminated with other metals through coatings and that sort of stuff, and then they also quite often get downgraded to be lower grade alloys than they were originally. For example, structural steel is typically recycled into rebar, the bit sticking out there so it's not becoming structural steel again, it's becoming support for concrete. And so, as I say, that's the linear economy where we're digging stuff out of the ground, using it for 30, 40 years or even less, and then throwing it away and actually ending up downcycling it. So what the circular economy is about is actually trying to sort of close that loop and create a much more circular process where we reduce the amount of demand for raw materials and we radically reduce the amount of waste that we're generating. And those sort of principles are locked into this diagram for the built environment, which is talking about retaining, refitting, refurbishing our existing buildings as a priority, and also to design new buildings. If we have to design new, then we design them so they can be retained, refitted, refurbished, and so designed for adaptability and long life, basically. And then those outer three circles will talk about reclaim and reuse of bits of the building, remanufacturing bits of the building, such as building services, and then recycling or composting the biological materials, such as timber, when we get down to the level of the material, but that's the last resort. We did the priorities through the higher levels I've just spoken about. And then there's a whole set of design principles, and then these are actually in the London plan and reflected in the circular economy statement guidance. But some of those principles are basically about lean design, reducing the amount of waste that we're generating, trying to use resources as efficiently as we can. Designing for adaptability is obviously about making the buildings last as long as we can before they have to be knocked down. And rather than being knocked down, we want them to be disassembled rather than demolished. And that's the whole idea around the sort of design for disassembly, so that they could be taken apart, reconfigured, and bits could be reused on other buildings. And then lastly, it's about selecting materials. So selecting materials that are responsibly sourced, selecting materials that don't have toxic materials in them, chemicals in them that would make it difficult to recycle or reclaim bits of the building. And then around the outside here, I'll come to building in layers in a second, but around the outside here is this idea that we're using waste as a resource is basically borrowed from the idea in nature that in the natural environment there is no such thing as waste, and it's something that we've created as any designer creates waste, in the fact that if they're not thinking about the next life and what's going to happen next to that, disposable coffee cup and all that sort of thing, it's creating this sort of single-use idea. So so in nature, waste from one system becomes a nutrient or a resource for the next system, and that's the sort of idea that we're trying to build across. And the other concept is around circular business models, about can we close the loop more with manufacturers and try and make sure incentivize return of bits of stuff, or even can we do it pay-per-use models where we're just effectively borrowing things from manufacturers. And I just want to pick up on that I think that one design principle, the building in layers, before I finish, which I think is because it's a really important underpinning message, because a lot of the circular economy principles are based on things like mobile phones and things like that in the last few years, which are very it's quite easy to see how you could apply circular economy principles to those and return them to manufacturer to take the bits out and all the rest. But actually, buildings are made up of thousands and thousands of components with massively different lifespans. So in this diagram, the structure of the building might be there for 100 years, hopefully, not 30 or 40, whereas the interior of the building is much more fast moving, and you might be stripping out every time the tenancy changes every couple of years, and you might be, let's say, ripping up the carpets because they're the wrong color or whatever, and they would then probably go to landfill typically. So the philosophy would be the structure you may apply long life loose fit and design it for adaptability in a long life, whereas the interior you might design differently and say, well, okay, we've got to accept that some of this interior stuff is going to get torn up really quickly, so can we make it out of a single polymer so that it can go back into be made into new carpet, or make it out of biological materials that can be composted. So that's the broad philosophy, and that's how we apply the circular economy to the built environment. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Dave. And I think that really emphasizes how important this is for the built environment to be, seeking to do something about its impact, both on the natural world and on how we live in cities as well. So yeah, really useful stuff. Let's hand over now to Rohan, who's going to be taking us through how we've used those ideas, those principles about circular economy, and applied them in practice to the circular economy guidance for circular economy statements. Over to you, Rohan.
Thanks, Rob. And hello, everyone. As Rob said, so I'll be building on Dave's explanation of what the circular economy is and how that's applied to the built environment, to explain to you how we're trying to translate that into action through the circular economy statement, which we require through the London Plan. So I'll be doing a bit of a policy context at the start, and then the bulk of my presentation will be on the guidance and giving you an overview of the key elements of the guidance. So let's get started. Cool. So yeah, for the policy context, I think you can trace the commitment to the circular economy back to the mayoral manifesto in 2016, where the mayor committed to lead on reducing the city's waste footprint and working to increase recycling and cut the amount of waste London sends to landfill. So that was in the manifesto, and then that translated into a policy document called the London Environment Strategy, which was published in 2018. And that saw a specific focus on a transition to the low carbon circular economy. And that was to note, that was the same year that the mayor declared a climate emergency. And so the circular economy was a key aspect of tackling the climate emergency from the mayor's perspective. And then moving on to that document that you see in the middle, the London Plan, we introduced the circular economy policy into the new London Plan to recognise that the built environment is a massive contributor to the waste generated in London. I think the stat we have is that the built environment sector contributes more than half of the waste material that arises in London. So yeah, we introduced policies to do with the circular economy in the London Plan to affect the things we build. And that last document on the right there is a kind of precursor to the guidance this presentation is about, but it's a more general introduction to the circular economy in the built environment, which is worth a read if you haven't already. So to go into the London Plan policies, the new London Plan policies in a bit more detail, there are two main policies which promote the circular economy in the built environment. One of them is the waste policy, SI7, and the other is the design policy, D3. So to take the design policy first, the policy requires development proposals to think about how a building's use might change over time, its longevity, and the quality of build and materials. And part of the policy highlights the importance of high sustainability standards with specific reference to applying circular economy principles. I think it's worth dwelling on design policy D3 a bit more. I think this is a change in the way we're viewing the circular economy in this London Plan. Before we might have thought about we might have thought about waste in terms of what we do at the end of the life of a building after it's been demolished, in terms of thinking about what we can recycle or reuse from that demolition. But and that might have traditionally been more confined to the waste policies. But this design focus pushed us to think more about how do we get the most value and the most life out of the things we are building from the start. Despite that, the waste policy is still a key mechanism through which we're trying to transition to the circular economy. And as you can see, part of the policy that one of the requirements is a kind of general requirement for the mayor and waste planning authorities to promote the circular economy. And the next part of that policy is about, it contains some specific waste targets that help us move towards more sustainable use of materials. For example, we require the 95% reuse or recycling of construction and demolition waste. And we also require a 65% recycling rate for household and commercial waste. And importantly, one of the other aspects of policy SI7 is that we require referable applications to submit circular economy statements. And also it's worth noting that all the applications in the parliaments where appropriate. As I said, we introduced the requirement for submitting circular economy statements in policy S7, and part of what we said in the London Plan was that we'd provide some guidance for people who are looking to write circular economy statements. And this is what we came up with, is the circular economy statement guidance. And there's been a version that was out last year or at the start of this year. But we've recently republished a draft version for this consultation, and I'm taking you through that version. So what is a circular economy statement? It's effectively a tool that's embedded in the planning process that gets us to consider ways of making buildings more circular. And underpinning it is our three core principles, which kind of run through the document. And I'll speak a bit more about each of them in turn. The first one is conserving resources, increasing efficiency, and sourcing materials sustainably. So this is a fundamental principle, really. It's about questioning whether something needs to be built from scratch, whether it needs to be built at a particular scale or in a particular way. It's also about where you do identify the need to build, sourcing the material you do use sustainably, sourcing that material sustainably, for example, by specifying the use of reused or recycled material. The second principle we've got up there is designing to eliminate waste. So this is about making sure buildings are designed flexibly enough so that you aren't generating waste or the need for construction work throughout the life of the building. So in particular, that means that considering how the user's needs of the building might change over time and how a building might be able to respond to that. Designing to eliminate waste is also about designing out construction, demolition, and excavation waste by looking for opportunities to reclaim and reuse stuff that's already on site, and also at the end of life looking for strategies that involve disassembly rather than demolition. The last principle is managing waste sustainably at the highest value, and this principle is more about the waste that you do generate and managing, or any waste that you do generate, and managing that waste as far up the waste hierarchy as possible, both in the construction and demolition phases of the building, but also in the kind of operational phase when people are using the building. And the reason why these three principles are important, obviously they're circular economy principles in general, but in terms of the circular economy statement, we've structured some of our key asks in the statement around these principles. So they're important to keep in mind. So a circular economy statement effectively requires you to translate those core principles into commitments and measures that will be used in your site's design, build, and operation. So when you read through the full guidance, it explains in much more detail what would be required, exactly what would be required in a circular economy statement. But I'm going to talk to you now about the four kind of key elements of a circular economy statement that we expect to see included. The first of those is the strategic approach, which we've called in the guidance table 1. The second of the key elements is the circular economy commitments, which we've called table 2. The third key element is the bill of materials, and the last is the recycling and waste reporting form. So moving on to the first key element of a circular economy statement is the strategic approach. And while I said in the last slide that these are key requirements, which might make you think about targets, which the guidance does have some, and we'll talk about that later. But the circular economy statement is one of its key purposes is meant to be a kind of design tool for embedding circular economy thinking into the process of designing buildings, and the strategic approach is a good example of this. So this element is where this element of a circular economy statement is where you'll think about your overall approach to circular economy, and thinking about it in the context of and setting of your site. And the flow diagram here, which is in the guidance, guides you through the process of selecting a potential approach. So it's effectively showing a kind of hierarchy of approaches you can take. And it starts the top half with looking at what's already on site and considering ways in which you can maximize the opportunities to repurpose or refurbish what's already on site. And then if a new building or adding new buildings or components to a site is considered the best option, the bottom half of the flow diagram explores how you might get the most value out of those new things that you're building. And the kind of last rows in each of the halves of the diagram are kind of strategies, like broad circular economy strategies that you might want to think about or you might use, and those are explained individually in more detail in the guidance, but I'm not going to go through them now. So you'll be the strategic approach is where you'll select one of the kind of, or one or more of the circular economy design strategies, and you'll be representing that or detailing that in table 1 of a circular economy statement, which I haven't shown in the slide, but you can see in the guidance. But it's worth stressing, before I move on from the strategic approach, it's worth stressing that this piece of work, or this bit of thinking, needs to be done really early on in the design process. It needs to feed into the kind of design brief and concept design stages to be effective. And in terms of the planning process, this will be one of the important bits to be submitted part of a circular economy statement if for pre-application discussions or outline planning permission, so early stage discussions. But I'll talk a bit more about the full planning process towards the end of the presentation. So moving on to the next key element of a circular economy statement is what we're calling the key circular economy commitments. And this is where you move from the kind of strategic approach to the circular economy that you've decided in table 1, and you move to turn the strategic approach into concrete and specific commitments. So you'll need to come up with commitments that fulfill the core principles that we talked about earlier, which were conserving resources, designing to eliminate waste, and managing waste sustainably. And you can see that table 2, where you kind of fill in your key circular economy commitments, is structured along those core principles. And it's also structured, you see from the kind of top row here, it's also structured around the building and layers concept that Dave introduced in his presentation. So you'd report on each circular economy, you report your circular economy commitments for each layer of the building. For example, commitments relating to the structural layers may focus on longevity and the ability of the shell to be disassembled at the end of life, where things about the internal space can be more about flexibility and responding to different users over time, and also the ease of maintenance. So moving on to the third of the 4 key elements, we've got the bill of materials, and this is intended to encourage designers to select designs that use up less material. So it requires you to report the material intensity for each layer of the building. So that's the weight per unit area. And it also requires you to set targets for the use of recycled and reused material, aiming for a minimum of 20%. At this point, I think, it's worth highlighting how this is this aspect of the circular economy statement is meant to help you throughout the design process, rather than being something you kind of fill in at the end of your design stages. For example, we'd encourage you to use this template to compare different designs or approaches, and kind of iterate towards the least materially intensive designs, or using it as a way of comparing different designs. Moving on to the last key element of a circular economy statement, we have the recycling and waste reporting form, and this primarily relates to that last core principle we talked about in terms of managing waste sustainably and at the highest value. And the whole table is structured around ensuring that the development you're looking at helps to meet the waste targets that I mentioned earlier that are included in London Plan Policy SI7. So at the top half of the table, you can see this is about construction, demolition and excavation waste. And the London Plan targets for these are 95%, as I said before, 95% reuse and recycling of construction demolition waste. And for excavation waste, that's 95% beneficial use, which is a term we've defined in the London Plan. And when you read the guidance, the full guidance, which talks about this, the waste and recycling reporting form, you'll see that that section kind of stresses the prioritization of reusing material on site before looking at off-site waste management, and then other waste management techniques that might be way down the waste hierarchy, such as disposal to landfill. The bottom half of the last row of that, the waste and recycling reporting form, is about the kind of operational waste of a building, so the waste that the users of the building might produce once it's occupied. And as I said before, the London Plan target for that in policy SI7 is a 65% recycling rate for municipal waste, and that will relate to other documents that you might be producing for a planning application, such as the municipal waste strategy or things like that. So that's just a really quick overview of the different key elements of a circular economy statement. And I'm going to end just by giving you an outline of the stages of developing a circular economy statement and how that lines up with the different planning stages for referable applications. Essentially, we want the circular economy statement that you produce to be more detailed the further along the kind of development management process that you go. So at the pre-app stage or for outline planning and permission, we're mainly looking to see your strategic approach, and we want to see that detailed in table 1. But that might also lead you to consider some circular economy commitments, which you can fill in draft in table 2, which build on your strategic approach. So the main thing at the outline planning stage or pre-application stage is the strategic approach, and we're calling that what you submit at pre-app or outline planning application a draft circular economy statement. And then at the full application stage, when referable applications get referred to the mayor, we want to see a detailed circular economy statement. So that includes your strategic approach, and it builds on any draft commitments you might have produced in table 2 to provide more detailed commitments. And then it also should contain the bill of materials and the recycling and waste reporting form. And at this stage, I think it's worth noting that the kind of evidence underpinning your commitments and your calculations should be stronger, and you should be demonstrating that your commitments are achievable and include your plans for kind of implementing and realizing them. And that final point there I've got is about us kind of wanting to keep track of the outcomes of circular economy statements. and therefore we're requiring post-planning updates. So you go back to your commitments that you've made in Table 2 and all the kind of estimates you might have made in the bill of materials or the waste and recycling reporting form, and you go back to them and you'd update the estimates with what actually happened and provide that to us to monitor, and also provide any lessons learned. I think that's pretty much the end of my presentation, apart from just to reiterate what Rob said at the start on kind of where we are with the guidance. So we're currently in the middle of the public consultation, and it will close in January 2021. We'd obviously really welcome your feedback through the online survey that we've put out as part of the consultation, and we'll be reviewing all that feedback and publishing the final guidance sometime next year. But it's also worth noting that the requirement for producing circular economy statements for referral applications is kind of live and active now through the new London Plan. So you should be submitting circular economy statements and referring to the draft guidance that we've got published to help you do that. So I think that's all I had to say. And thank you for listening and taking time out of your Thursday morning to listen.
Thanks very much, Rohan, and thanks for taking us through the viability. Sorry, I'm reading the questions at the same time. This is my mistake. Thanks for taking us through the London Plan guidance there. Just to say, we've had a couple of questions in the chat. Can I just remind people to use the Q&A function for the questions? We will pick up the questions that are in the chat as well, but the Q&A just keeps it all in one neat place and makes my job easier trying to corral everything when we come to that point. I'm going to move us swiftly on to Andrea, and we'll then come to some Q&As at the end. So over to you, Andrea.
Thanks, Rob. I am going to turn off my video just in case. I've been having a few issues today. Okay, thank you, Rob. Thank you again for everyone for coming. It's really great to be supporting this consultation today. I think, as Rob mentioned at the beginning, I'm from the London Waste and Recycling Board, and just for those of you who don't know us, because we're a bit of a funny kind of organisation, we exist to help support the GLA and the London Borough's transition to a low carbon circular economy. We do that through a number of ways, through providing support and advice, through running research pilots and demonstrations, and also through supporting circular SMEs. We have a range of focus areas, including plastics, food and textiles, but I work on the built environment focus area. And our current project in the built environment is the Circuit project. It is a 4-year EU Horizon 2020 funded project, through which we're seeking to accelerate the uptake of circular construction techniques in the built environment, so that they move on from being niche exemplars to things that are adopted citywide. It's a collaborative project in which London is working with 3 other cities, Hamburg, Helsinki, and the city of Copenhagen. And across London, LWARB are the project coordinator for the London cluster. GLA are one of our other partners, and we are also working with Imperial College, the BRE, the UK Green Building Council, Grimshaw Architects, and Clear Village. We are focusing on 3 specific parts of circular construction. So the first one we're calling urban mining, and that is focusing on the reuse and high value recycling of current demolition materials. The second area is looking at transformation of our existing built environment to meet current needs, and therefore avoiding demolition happening in the first place. And the third aspect we're calling flexible design, which is around designing new builds to make them easier to either adapt or deconstruct to make either urban mining or transformation easier in the future. So just touching on what Rohan was saying earlier, this is the kind of really embedding it into the design thinking side, where the other 2 are kind of focusing on how do we tackle the kind of current waste challenges. In each of these focus areas, we are going to be developing new tools and techniques, demonstrating or piloting these through a series of projects, and then using the findings from these demonstrators to develop various outputs, from guidance to training to online tools. And for all of this activity, our key aims are to reduce the virgin material use by 20%, reduce costs by 15%, and also reduce the associated carbon emissions and waste generation with the built environment. And then specifically in London to support the policy SI7 that Rohan has talked about and help London transition to a net zero carbon city. And then, so we're doing a huge amount of different things within the project. So I've tried to draw out a few kind of quite tangible aspects that we're going to be doing over the next 3 years that we think will really help support the implementation of this guidance. Firstly, we're looking to be developing templates to standardize the collection of information. That can either be building on the templates that Rohan has already shared, or there might be other aspects where you guys feel like more templates would be useful. We're going to be producing a range of case studies highlighting implementation of these ideas. So not just from our demonstrator projects, but collecting together a whole range of examples to help both the industry be aware of what's possible, and also planning officers when they're reviewing statements to have a better idea of what's possible. I've already mentioned we're looking to be producing guidance. The topics for these guidance can be tailored. So we know there's pre-demolition audits are mentioned in the circular economy statement guidance, but there's not a huge amount of detail on that. So that's one area where we could add a next level of detail. There's already a question in the chat around viability. That's another area where we could look to provide further support. We'll be creating an online circularity wiki, which we'll be sharing all of our outputs, but also the intention is to collate all the existing best practice methods and guidance that's existing. So that will be a good resource for everyone to build upon. We're looking at improving the availability and visibility of data. For example, one area we've already identified is around kind of recycled and reused percentages in current buildings. There seems to be very little data on this. Is there something we can do to help make that more available? Looking at 3D technologies such as augmented reality and virtual reality to support how everyone can become more involved in the built environment, and hopefully that would lead to more circular solutions being adopted. And finally, we'll be developing and delivering training to both planning officers within boroughs and also industry trying to respond to these. There's a range of ways to get involved, and my contact details and the project's contact details are on the next slide, and then they will be made available in the chat as well. But just so you're aware, we have a quarterly newsletter, and you can receive that by signing up to our mailing list. So that will let you know of upcoming events and also the key highlights from the past 3 months. If you'd like to be kept up to date more regularly than that, we do have social media feeds on Twitter and LinkedIn. So that's where you will find up-to-date information on all the events coming up. The blog articles that we are producing, we've got a good steady flow of blogs at the moment, a couple per month, sorry, on a range of different topics. And it's also where you'll be the first to hear about the publication of guidance and other deliverables we produce. If you're here representing a borough and you're not already involved in our Urban Decision Maker Forum, you're very welcome to join that. We meet every 3 months or so, and that's where you can help steer which areas we produce further guidance on, and where eventually what we'll produce training on as well. If you already have projects that are implementing these ideas, feel free to get in touch and let us know, and then we can incorporate that into our case study library. And finally, as already mentioned, let us know which aspects of implementing the circular economy statements you would welcome more guidance on, and that can help steer the work that we do going forward. So I hope that's a nice quick run through and overview of our project. There is more information available on our website and our social media feeds, as I've already mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Andrea. And I think it's worth saying that, yeah, we're really pleased to have LWARB and the Circuit Project helping support us and us support you as well. It's a real partnership working here. We know that the planning system can do what the planning system can do, but actually there's a real need for things outside of planning to also help support this. So it's great that we've got that resource to draw on. I just encourage everybody in the chat to sign up to those, the newsletter, and to follow what LWARB are doing on this. We've had some great questions come through. Do please keep putting your questions as they come to you in the Q&A. Just to say, as we go through the questions, I'm not going to be reading out people's names. That's just a data protection thing that we've been advised about because we're recording this and it will be going on YouTube as well. So let's start with the questions that we've got in the chat here. We're going to start with the question, how is viability assessed in the context of Table 1 for the guidance? So in terms of viability, Dave, I wonder whether that's something you want to come back on.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's talking about whether we are pushing for refurbishment over new build and that sort of thing. I think that's what you mean in terms of viability, I'm assuming. In that case, then I mean, the idea of this at the moment is that it's a hierarchy and it's a process that you go through. So I don't think we're going to be sort of able to or should be turning away projects that are proposing to demolish some buildings and build new, because there's obviously we've got to look at this in the round in terms of best use of land as well, and that is actually part of the assessment. Is if you can demonstrate that the buildings are of poor quality and that you're going to intensify the use and then also incorporate circular economy principles into all that, then that's okay. And if you're demolishing those buildings, we'd be asking for pre-demolition audits to demonstrate that you're going to be salvaging some materials out of that, so you're not just shredding and crushing everything. So hopefully that answers that question.
And yeah, if you want to, the person who asked that question wants to expand, then absolutely please feel free to do so in the Q&A section as well. That'd be really helpful. Andrea, Rohan, anything to add? Andrea wants to come in on viability, yes?
Yeah, just to say it's a topic that we had already identified as being an issue within the project, and it's something we've done a piece of research on already in trying to work out what does make a building viable for refurbishment and not. So it's a piece of work we've almost finished, and hopefully they'll have something to share in the spring. But so much of it comes down to the individual economics of a site, and it's untapped potential basically for more space, whether that's more residential space or more commercial space, and that's something that's obviously very tricky to assess in a planning context. I agree, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I think we all know that viability is one key part of what the planning system does, and is a very complex process. Rohan, anything to add on that one?
No, nothing more from me. I think covered it.
Okay, so the second question in the chat is a good question. What actions or penalties, if any, will be taken if developments don't fulfill the circular economy commitments in the statement? Rohan, I think I'm going to come to you on that one first.
Cool. I think it's a good question, and obviously we're really keen to make sure that anything that is put in a circular economy statement does kind of come to fruition, and we hope by kind of going through the process of the circular economy statements and having the scrutiny of them from our side, that leaves the developer and us in a position where the commitments that you're making are really achievable and things that are not likely to kind of fall by the wayside. But having said that, we know that things do change during the kind of design and build of a development over a period of time. What we're looking to do is like look at planning conditions and how we might use that to either kind of enforce the commitments or enforce the kind of monitoring of those commitments, and help boroughs to do that. And we'll be working with boroughs to kind of hopefully draft some of those conditions and implement them, or consider other avenues for how we might make sure the actions or commitments turn into action.
Thanks very much, Rohan. And I think it's worth saying that you know, we recognise that there is a need for quite substantial change across how sort of the building sector, the built environment sector, and how things get built here. Yeah, this is one tool that we're trying to use, but there's also a need for wider learning as well. Dave, was there anything you wanted to respond to around this, or Andrea? Andrea says, no, thank you, leaving this one well alone. Okay, great. We'll move on now to the questions that are in the Q&A. I'll just bring those up. Okay, so a sort of similar question, but maybe a more specific one here. How would you verify that building elements would be designed to be demounted at the end of life of a building? Be interested in this process in order to steer design teams in dealing with this aspect. Anyone want to take this one in particular? Dave, you unmuted.
I can have a go. Yeah, I mean, what we're looking for is people to make those sorts of commitments at this stage, and I think that the things that are coming up out of circular economy statements for reviewing is people looking at systems that are specifically designed to be disconnected. So particularly, notably people are talking about bolted facades and using steel bolted connections and that sort of stuff. So there's definitely some options there, and I think also people are starting to volunteer the idea of writing a deconstruction guide for the building. So I think that would probably help in terms of, the guidance isn't really there to give practical design guidance. It's really there to tell people what the GLA are looking for from a circular economy statement. So in terms of actual practical steer for design teams, I think we have developed with Sheffield University, we developed a tool called Regenerate, which is free to use online, and that does have a few questions around sort of design for disassembly, and there's a few other guides that are cross-referenced in the circular economy statement guidance, which you could look at.
Great. Andrea?
Yeah, I agree with everything that David said, and I was also going to mention that tool is a good starting point. I think, the thing that everyone needs to bear in mind is that you can't have a prescriptive answer that is applicable for every building, and that's why the guidance is written the way it is to specifically in the strategic assessment work out what the right approach is, and then build that into the design requirements that's given to the rest of the team. From my experience, design teams are very good at responding to a design brief, and there's not a huge, they can deliver like design for demountability if you ask them to. So it's more about making sure you've got the right brief for the right layer, the right part of the building. Having said that, obviously, we also know it's an issue, and therefore we are hoping to develop some kind of like guidelines or checklists of things that you could consider. But it's never going to be a prescriptive, you have to do it this way, or we would verify it this exact way, because as we are aware, almost every building we create is unique. Make a rod for our own back in that respect.
Great, thank you. Rohan, anything to add on that one?
Not much, apart from saying, just highlighting how monitoring might help this issue. So as we get more circular economy statements through and get a better idea of the kind of design principles that are common or best practice or anything beyond that, we'll definitely be looking to share that learning with the industry and with everyone to help get ideas out there about how this might be, how, for example, you might design for disassembly. So yeah, that's something we're definitely looking at, and LWOB and the Circuit Project will be helping with as well.
Great, thank you. The next question The plan appears to outline some great initiatives to make the building more circular at the end of life, but is there anything in the plan to ensure they are designed to reduce waste during construction? Oh, hang on, sorry, my questions are moving around. Okay, yes. Is there anything in the plan to ensure they're designed to reduce waste during construction? For example, packaging waste, which can account for up to 25% of construction waste by volume, temporary protection and hoardings, and temporary shuttering for concrete structures. Dave, I think you want to come in on this one, don't you?
Hi, Charlie. Yes. Yeah, that's the simple answer. I mean, it does. It's sort of built into the principles, but there is also in the table 2 there is a column that is about construction stuff as one of the layers about, and that goes through each of the 9 principles and says how you're minimizing and stuff. So it's implied there, and I don't think at the moment we haven't got a. Well, no, we haven't got an actual target to reduce the amount of construction waste arising. But that's something that we might be interesting to include. But there is one around the percentage diversion from landfill, and that is monitored. And I know that's slightly different, but there's certainly an emphasis on, and it's picked up as construction waste, excavation waste, and demolition waste are all picked up, and you have to declare the amount that you are that's arising. So I guess or intent that you have to declare how much you think at the design stage you're going to create, and then post construction reporting would actually then give you'd have to report the actual numbers against that. And then I think, as Rohan was saying, that over time, as we get more data over the first year of this, we're going to start then hopefully tightening that down and starting to look at where we can set targets. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's really important, Dave. And I think it's worth saying that we recognise that this is a fairly new approach, and that's why we're taking this approach of looking for getting the evidence from what's actually happening on the ground, figuring out what's working, so that we can then over time improve that, feed that back into the guidance, feed that back into our practices and our approaches. So yeah, it's deliberately designed as this sort of I was going to say circular approach, but certainly an approach where we learn from best practice, etc. Does anybody else, Andrea or Rohan, want to come in on that particular question?
Just quickly, because I just did a quick Control F on the document. I think it's print commitment 2.2. If you want to look at that issue in a bit more detail, there's a bit more on the issue of kind of offcuts and waste from construction, and also a bit on offsite manufacture. Yeah, if you wanted to have a bit more of a read.
Great, thank you very much, Rohan. Next question, Andrea, you've put your hand up for this one. So the question is, I'd be interested to understand more about the level of detail that would be required to be submitted at planning when the design is only at REBA stage 3, particularly within the bill of materials.
Yeah, I think we could all answer this one because we have been asked it a few times, I think. But it's intentionally progressive, isn't it? As David will say about the statements that have already been submitted, it is something that's achievable, and it is at REBA stage 3, and it is something that is also required for the whole life carbon assessment. That's also a new requirement in the new London plan. I think everyone understands that these things will evolve and get more refined as the design gets more developed, which is why the submission of the at completion statements is so useful, because it also helps us understand, how wrong our forecasts can be. It's not just an assessment of, performance, it's in that respect as well. So I think the full level of detail that's in the table is requested at the submission, the full submission, but noting that it will change over time and it will get more refined as the design develops. Dave should probably add something on its achievability.
Well, no, I think you've covered it. I think, as you say, that we're certainly seeing in that we've had 25 odd circular economy statements through, and they're all providing some sort of estimate of the bill of materials for the main, for the main layers is what it asks for. So for structure and for fabric and some sort of basic interior, and that's usually, we find that it's usually found in the cost plan. And as Andrea said, it's also required for the whole life carbon assessment. We're going to have to get those numbers together to be able to do that analysis, and because that's actually much more number heavy than the circular economy statement.
Rohan, anything to add on that one?
Just a little remark. I mean, obviously for some layers of the building you might not have as much detail, and we probably expect that, but it's just about where you don't have the kind of full detail that you'd like to have, just about documenting any assumptions that you make on and evidencing that, and providing that to us. But like Dave said, for a lot of the statements that we've seen in there, we found that at that stage you do have quite a lot of detail for kind of the main structural elements, at least.
Great, thank you. One more question we've got, which is about building operation. So the focus appears to be on minimizing waste within the building design and construction, rather than considering wider circular economy business models that could be adopted, particularly during the operation of the building. Is this intentional? Rohan, do you want to start on this one?
It's a good question. I mean, I think there's definitely maybe a lean towards the construction and like side of the building, and maybe less of a focus on the operation. But I mean, we do have both in the guidance and in the London plan a requirement for well, this is more about supporting waste being managed as up the waste hierarchy as possible, but we have a requirement for providing the space and the storage to kind of facilitate the recycling targets that we want to see in the London plan. But in terms of circular economy business models that could be adopted, I don't think we have much in the guidance about that in relation to the operational phase. But again, that's something that that could be achieved through planning, but also will have a much kind of wider that'll be dealt with through a much wider range of players and through a much wider range of work that we do at the GLA. So I think it's probably fair to say that we probably could have do some more thinking of that in the guidance, but also we'll be doing more thinking about that wider than just us in planning in several teams across the GLA.
Andrea, was there anything you wanted to add on that one?
Yeah, I think I was going to say that I think the guidance just set out the principles that want to be achieved, and they could be achieved through design or through different business models, or potentially through other means as well. So I think maybe it's not explicit, but I don't feel like it's not covered.
And Dave, was there anything you wanted to add on that one?
Not really. I think I agree with Andrea and Rohan. I mean, there's the principles do cover it, and it's really, you meet it in the way that you can. I think that there is a slight limitation in that we are looking at planning is looking at the design and construction of the building. It is not really able to influence the operation directly. So it depends on the client as well, whether they are intending to operate the building as well. So that would make it more difficult to sort of require any of that sort of thing going in. So yeah, there's a sphere of influence as well.
Absolutely.
Just to quickly add one more thing on that. I think Dave, in your bit of the presentation, you went through the kind of building in layers approach for the kind of stuff layer. There are approaches to kind of leasing and things like that, which could be put in your circular economy kind of commitments, and although that's not something you kind of really could secure through planning, it's something that you could definitely have in your commitments and look to implement, of course.
Thanks, Rohan. That's really great. We've got one more question that we're going to take, but we do have a little bit more time. So if anybody does have any more pressing questions, you've got a couple of minutes to put those in the Q&A. So this question is one Andrea's already had a look at, but I think it's worthwhile answering for everybody. So the question is there any work taking place to help create the infrastructure, associated businesses, tools and logistics necessary to support circular economy practices, for example, digital platforms to identify sources of available resources? Andrea.
Yes, so the answer that I've already put in the chat was around what the Circuit project is doing. So we will be creating a range of digital platforms. One of them, which is called an atlas. As you might imagine, hopefully we'll have a mapping feature. But the idea of the atlas is to make useful bits of information more easily available. So at the moment, it might be what are the existing buildings, so you can make a forecast of what materials are in them. Hopefully in the future that might actually contain the materials themselves, so we have much more knowledgeable about that. And the other thing specifically we're looking to create is a materials exchange platform. We are aware there's already quite a few of those, so we're not going to create a new platform, but we are going to do something that is additive to the existing environment to make those material exchanges easier. So those are kind of specific things we're doing. And then in terms of the kind of research and exploration activities, we're also looking into the skills and storage and logistics requirements that are needed to help facilitate more reuse. We don't know what the specific output will be from that research yet, but there'll at least be recommendations around those things coming out of the project.
Great stuff. Dave, Rohan, anything to add on that?
Just on the infrastructure bit, and I guess logistics as well, kind of another strand of work we do in the planning team is kind to respond to local waste plans, and they look at kind of safeguarding of land for many uses, but also waste uses. And that's something where we're looking to, we do work on safeguarding that with boroughs, and by doing that, we hope that kind of safeguards land for circular economy uses. So where all this material might be reclaimed and reused, if it's not on site, it will be in these spaces, hopefully, and safeguarding them is an important way in which we hope to facilitate it.
Absolutely.
Can I add something else, Rob?
Sorry, Andrea?
Can I add something else? I just remembered something else.
Of course you can.
There's a point around like associated businesses as well. So LWARB run the Advanced London programme, which is it's business support for SMEs, either who have a circular business model already or who want to transition to a circular business model. So there's a whole website called Advanced London where you can find information about the 3 different programs that LWARB run, and applications for businesses to get that support open periodically. So I encourage anyone, in that space, looking with new businesses or new business models, to have a look at Advanced London and see support that can be received through that mechanism.
Great, thanks very much. I'm just trying and failing to find the screen I want to share. No, it's not jumping out at me, so we'll have to cope with that. Anyway, I think we'll draw this session to a close now. We've had some really great questions, genuinely some really knowledgeable and thoughtful questions there. So that's been really helpful, and we'll be using all of that as we come to review the circular economy statement guidance. So just to say a special thank you to Andrea, Dave, and Rohan, who've presented today and for answering all the questions. We've had Natalie and Jill in the background providing us with support throughout all of this session, and in advance of this session as well, so thanks to them too. So it just remains for me to remind you all to please respond to the consultation, to follow us on Twitter, to follow and sign up to the Elwall Circuit project as well. Rohan's now sharing his screen to give you the information. There it is. Thanks, Ray. Yeah, that's the details of how to do all of that. And crucially, to think about the circular economy as you're developing your schemes or as you're considering the planning applications that are coming through. And I think that's everything. Thanks everybody for coming along. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.